A good morning to all our viewers and welcome to Live at the Watering Hole this morning, where today we're starting with one of our favorite not so small critters, the African savanna elephant, here at Oldonyo in Kenya. And what a spectacular specimen approaching the watering hole there. Just look at all those butterflies and flying insects around that watering hole. Ooh, and there's even more elephants coming. What a beautiful start to this afternoon. Now my name is Jaapie Potgieter and I'll be your host this afternoon, and I'm very, very excited to see what's in store for us. But never a bad thing to start with elephants. Just have a look here. Always an interesting dynamic developing around a watering hole when elephants approach, especially the larger bulls. And I'm sure this group, they do know each other, so there'll be an interesting little dynamic between them. Now while we're here, I want to remind our viewers that we are live and interactive, so you can send your questions through, your comments. If there's anything you'd like me to chat about this afternoon, you're welcome to let us know, and then we can take it from there. And there at the bottom of the screen you can see there's all the contact details to engage with us. And as always, I'm very, very interested to see what questions we get this afternoon. It's also part of the way that I get to learn. Get kept on my toes that way. Just have a look. There we can see there's always one grumpy elephant. And you can see this guy's got quite a bit more bulk. It seems like he's got a decent set of tusks. As we know, there are quite a few well-endowed elephants in this region around Oldonyo, and of course we do get to see a bit of action around the watering holes. If there's a bit of a congestion happening around it. But yeah, generally speaking, out in nature, the larger the animal, they get the right of way. Now also there are other factors, especially when it comes to bull elephants, that might affect dynamics around a watering hole, as we see. Now from what I can see, it does look to me like this elephant has quite a bit of swelling around the temples, so potentially this guy might be in must, in which case the other elephant's reaction is not uncommon. And generally speaking, he'll be left alone. And he'll also spend his time around the watering hole. They either drink very quickly, more like a splash of the mouth and the trunk, and then continue along their stroll, which can last for days and vast distances, or they might spend ample time around it. Well, let's see. See, he's kind of just testing the water a little bit. Now I'm astounded by all these butterflies, and from where I am it's difficult to be able to identify some of them, but I'm sure there might be quite a couple of different species. I can see darker ones with stripes on them, lighter ones, white and yellow ones. And of course, always good to remind ourselves that water is not just for the larger animals, there's also a lot of smaller little critters that come down. And talking about that right of way, you can see that giraffe in the background anxiously staring around, seeing what the others are up to, probably gauging what's happening with the elephants in this area. Look a little impatient because they've probably been waiting for a while the elephants are in the area. So we have our first comment of the afternoon from Melanistic Marble. Hello to you too, and Melanistic Marble's also saying hello to everybody else. Thank you very much for that. Also saying there's so many big tusks here. Indeed, that is quite a spectacular sight. I do agree, Melanistic Marble. It is quite a special treat to be seeing so many large tusked elephants. Also something that Kenya is known for, is for the elephants with large tusks, and what spectacular beasts they are. But now what's interesting around this section here is you can see that elephant is kind of trying to look a little larger than normal. He's standing quite upright, but this guy to the right doesn't seem too bothered by his presence. And I wonder if anything more might happen, or whether that elephant will just tolerate his presence. I guess with elephant bulls there is also a certain level of size that the animals will kind of tolerate each other, but generally speaking, the elephant that I suspect to be in must have quite decently sized tusks, and I don't think other elephants in the area would want to get into a tussle with him if it's not necessary. Now I can hear the flies buzzing, and that's also one thing on these humid days where it's a little bit cloudy around the watering holes. We always have this very pungent smell of animal droppings and animal body odors hanging around, and especially when the elephants have visited. Now, Colin is asking if I've ever seen a female tusker. Yes, I have, Colin. In fact, in some areas there are females with very, very large tusks. I know even in East Africa you find female elephants with tusks all the way to the ground almost. They generally don't spread as wide as the male's tusks do. They tend to go more in a straight line down, and in some cases they even cross at the tips. Now I've seen that even with elephants in the Kruger National Park, where I've spent quite a bit of time working, and occasionally you'll find that especially some of the older females, they might have quite long tusks. I wouldn't say large necessarily. They generally don't have the girth that the male's tusks do, or the weight. So from what I understand, an elephant is regarded as a tusker if both his tusks weigh over 100 pounds. Now, of course, with living elephants, those are more estimations than anything else today. I think also the what would you say, the categories or the specifications needed to be regarded as a tusker is also looked at a little bit differently, like understanding elephants a little bit better and how they age and at what stage of their life their tusk starts to go into a growth spurt. We understand that even though an elephant at a certain age might not be regarded as a tusker, it still has the potential to become a tusker, usually once they reach the age of about 45 and onwards. Now, generally speaking, in some regions they refer to that as emerging tuskers, and I know in some areas like the Kruger Park there are some of these elephants that are quite closely monitored, and in a way they become celebrities without them even knowing that they are. We kind of give them that status with social media and our fascination by them. But this is quite an interesting development here. You can see this elephant to the right is gradually moving closer, almost in a manner just to test the water, to see how the other one would react. It's clearly also not showing any challenge to the elephant on the left. It's probably just a little bit curious and probably just want to engage in a bit of friendly greeting behavior. Now, it was interesting to see some of the younger elephants that were at the watering hole when this guy arrived moved off. Now I'm wondering, there's also a chance that it might speak to the dynamics of the groups of male elephants that might be moving around this area. Male elephants don't tend to follow the herds always. They sometimes spend a bit of time in areas where there's good food and water, and they'll form their own little social groups. They might hang around an area, which is great for cameras at the watering holes. It means we get to see some individuals. So Janine is saying that the names of tuskers in Kenya make me laugh. Craig, Tim, TJ, Paolo and Tolstoy. Tolstoy, that's a very interesting name for a tusker. It must be a legendary tusker, that, if it's got any resemblance to the name is given. But TJ, interesting elephant name. So is Craig and Tim. Paulo, maybe a Portuguese elephant. I have to say, it's surprising how some of these animals do get named by us, and also knowing that they couldn't give a hoot about what they called. But I have come across worse names for elephants. Some areas, elephant names are literally just down to numbers. I guess giving animals names does help us to form some sort of a relation or a bond to them. And it's hard not to, especially with a creature such as an elephant, such an amazing animal. all have their unique personalities and the unique relationships with other elephants, with other creatures, with humans. As we see these two compared to the other elephants that were around the watering hole. And have a look, the giraffe in the back is still hoping for the best. He's creeping a little bit closer as time goes along. Now let's have a look. This elephant is moving around. Maybe I might just be investigating the area around the pan. We can see that bare patch of soil, of course, would be full of the scent of other animals that might have moved past. You can see he's not really drinking anymore. But I can almost feel the forlorn look that giraffe's got, knowing that it might still be a while before he drinks. Now, we got an interesting question from Clara asking if I think it's a good idea to name wild animals. Clara, personally, I do not actually think it's a good idea. But I also think that these things depend on the context and one's position towards wild animals. I think if my understanding of naming something is, in a way, you claim ownership over something, and you kind of create this preconceived idea of a anthropological identity, which is something I think in the larger scheme of things could potentially give us the wrong idea or the wrong understanding about animals, their behavior and their relationship to the environment. So personally, I don't name wild animals. I kind of take them for what they are on their own terms. Especially creatures like elephants, whales, the animals with higher intelligence as they are regarded. I mean, with elephants, there's interesting studies that implicate that they actually have their own dialects between different groups and they can recognize each other. If I'm not mistaken, a matriarch can recognize as many as up to 60 different dialects, which is incredible. And I think in that regard, like, they probably have a way of understanding themselves as a separate presence, in a way that naming them kind of takes away, in my opinion. But that's just how I feel. I think in a way also naming elephants do incite empathy, especially from people that don't get the chance to actively see the animals in their natural habitat. Good job. Wild animal is a wild animal, and I think today's world we are increasingly more drawn into their environment, but I think it's always just wise to remember that they have their own lives that is completely separate from our understanding and conception of how they live and how they are. And there he moves off. That's an interesting look from the elephant that's still at the watering hole. He's kind of giving it a thought as to where is he going off to. He patiently tolerated his presence without any little smidgen of aggressiveness towards him. And you can almost hear that giraffe counting down. Okay, 1 to go, 1 to go. And then it's my turn. And the others in the background as well, hanging around. By the looks of it, this elephant might still stick around this watering hole. I don't think he's going to leave immediately. He's almost dozing off at this point. Oh, would you look at that? LEPR is saying the Ellies love to create bubbles. Indeed they do, LEPR. They love blowing bubbles. Oh wow, okay. This looks like another young elephant approaching. Does he also approach with his trunk up in a non-threatening manner? Couldn't hold his thirst any longer and probably took from watching the other elephant that this older bull doesn't mean him any harm. Very likely due to the reason that you can see he's quite a bit smaller in stature, and judging from his tusks he's a much younger animal, hence the older elephant probably do not regard him as any sort of a challenge to him. Now I'm wondering, I'm sure this elephant probably watched the little bit of interaction between the elephant that just left the watering hole and this big one, and probably regarded this situation as approachable. Andrew is asking, what do the elephants do if they suck up something they don't want? Well, Andrew, it depends on what it is. I think they often do, actually, especially with the start of their drinking, and that's why we find them shaking the tip of their trunk at the water surface to kind of break that meniscus layer at the top of the water where all the debris and dust and dead little insects and things gather. And that way they kind of just open it up to suck up the cleaner, less tainted water from just underneath the surface. Then at the same time, it's also done very delicately. And you'll often notice they don't go all the way down to the bottom, probably to try and prevent muddying up the water too much. But generally speaking, they'll spit it out. They'll blow it back out the trunk, or they'll spit it out. Sometimes you'll see they also kind of just like spray it into their mouths, almost as if they're cleaning their mouth as well, to get all the debris and excess plant material out of the teeth before drinking their water. Now have a look, this young elephant is very curious. Oh, that's pretty amazing. There we go. A respectable greeting. Trunk in the mouth. That's very, very interesting to see. Oh. Okay. He's overstepped his welcome. Maybe that was too much. For a moment there I thought the large bull might completely allow that. But I guess he just had to set those boundaries. Deborah is asking if elephants help the elderly and sickly in their herds. Deborah, yes indeed. To an extent they do. I think there's certainly a point reached by most group animals where the decision gets made regardless of the sick or old animal, and more regarding the general survival of the herd. But that is also in more extreme instances. Generally speaking, while they can, they do assist sickly and old animals, whether it's through companionship, proximity, all the way to physically helping them in some cases. I mean, the elephants have been known to try and assist injured animals in getting back up to their feet. I know the older elephants obviously help the little ones. They assist them, they push them up the banks, steep banks and hills. They kind of prevent them from falling over into gullies, and that'll be done very, very subtly and very carefully by a little bit of a physical assistance from a trunk. And in some cases elephants do even use the bulk of their body to assist, but there's definitely a point where an elephant might become a bit of a liability to the herd, or simply just not able to keep up with the herd, and the herd needs to move on for survival reasons. In that case the situation might change. But I do know, I've had the privilege of seeing an elephant, and I saw this elephant for a number of years in the same area. It was part of her home range and she would regularly move through the region, but she had a badly, or quite a skew back leg, and it looks like it was badly broken at some point, probably when the animal was much younger. And I'm saying that because the animal is adapted. You could see the way the muscles and the body's formed afterwards. It looks like it was a long-term injury. And she had one little calf in the later years that I was fortunate to see. Shortly from once the little calf was born, shortly after that, all the way through to a number of years, to the point where the calf was much older, looking, taking care after her. And that was pretty interesting to see. But I think these elephants have given us a beautiful show this far, so let's head over to Tortilla's camp in Kenya, where we've got a gazelle. Now this is spectacular.
When nature calls, Maui is the only answer. Satisfy your wanderlust and take to the open road in one of our fully equipped motorhomes. Boasting a fridge, gas stovetop, AC and bathroom, our motorhomes are comfortable and spacious, making any self-drive adventure in the Kruger or garden route memorable. Whether you travel alone, as a couple or the whole family, Maui has a motorhome for you. Maui, home where you roam.
Morning, you two. Hello.
We're going to be witnessing the relocation of a female cheetah that was born right here in Welgevonden Game Reserve. She's been moved to Lapalala Wilderness.
When the Mara turns green, life surges, the air hums, the earth stirs, and the wild comes alive. Here, the wonder never ends. It just changes color. Every storm, every sunrise, every sweeping vista is an expression of wild magic. Visit the Masai Mara. Experience the magic.
When adventure calls, answer with Brits. Take on Southern Africa's most breathtaking landscapes from behind the wheel of a fully equipped 4x4 or SUV. From tents and bedding to a fridge and full kitchen gear, everything you need is already on board. And with 24-hour roadside assistance, you're free to go further and explore with confidence. Open roads, total freedom, no limits, just the journey ahead. Brits, equipped for adventure.
Exactly where the name comes from, but what's even more interesting is that this antelope is apparently genetically related to Sumering's gazelle and Thompson's gazelle. Now I do know that genetically there are quite a few of these gazelles in East Africa that's evolved in different regions over time, and they were generally described by naturalists a number of years ago, and each area they were regarded as a separate species, and whoever had one of the foremost accepted descriptions of them had the honor of incorporating their name within these animals' name. But what an interesting antelope. Certainly quite nice to watch. Monica's asking if there are any birds that keep animals away from a waterhole. Monica, yes, will be my straightforward answer. I wouldn't necessarily say that it would be their first intention to drive them away from a water body, more so than from their own personal little patch. But I guess there's birds that directly drive animals away from watering holes, and those that do it less so. Egyptian geese is certainly the first one that comes to mind. There we go. Have a look at that suspicious looks cast at them from those young gazelle. Like, those are the culprits that usually chase us away I'm sure that's what they're thinking. Egyptian geese tend to be quite territorial, and they also tend to be quite noisy, and I have seen them chase many a different species off the edge of a watering hole. And sometimes you have more than one pair of geese around the water's edge, and that could potentially mean animals will be chased off from all approaching sides, especially antelope. The animals that tend to be more skittish around watering holes, they tend to easily flee, but ultimately they'll make their way down if they're desperate. Large animals like rhino or elephant generally don't give too much thought to them, or buffalo. But indeed the Egyptian geese can be quite a force to be reckoned with. I've even seen them go at crocodiles for extended periods of time. They'll stand in front of them while the crocodile's basking on the bank, facing them, shouting. Other birds that come to mind is lapwings occasionally, but that's not so much directly the water's edge and a little bit further away, and that's more if they've got a nest in the area. Raptors, the fish eagle, certainly. Sometimes fish eagles can also forcefully deter other birds, especially from the water's edge. Other raptors that come down to drink in the middle of the day. If there's a resident pair of fish eagles and they got a nest, they might not be so accommodating. And then one that does so more indirectly is the thickney, the water thickney. So I've noticed a few times before, water thickneys are also quite vocal. If anything approaches a spot on the bank near the water where they might have a nest, they will make quite a noise. And that often also alerts other creatures that might have a nest in the area, like say female crocodiles. Now, so what I've gathered, to get back to Hannah's question about the strange name for the antelope, is that the Grant's gazelle is named after a 19th century Scottish explorer called James Grant. And like James, there are quite a bit of other naturalists, especially from the European countries, that came over to Africa, that had the honor of naming these animals. I guess that would be naming them to Europeans back in the day during a colonial era. And something also that I found that's quite interesting is apparently the Swahili name for the Grant's gazelle is Swala granti. That's also an interesting name. We've also got Granty in there. Maybe Granty must have been quite well known in that area. But what a beautiful, relaxed afternoon here around the watering hole. this watering hole's edge here at Tortolas Camp. I do enjoy watching the critters that come down the side. You can hear a lot of red-billed buffalo weavers going. As always, there's lots of life. Ooh, there's some zebra in the background. And have a look now. I'm wondering, it looks like this gazelle leaning over, even though there's grass, I'm sure that's growing on the edge of this watering hole, and because of that it's probably still quite muddy. Hence the gazelle standing there. Now I'm not sure if it is eating or drinking. Now often what happens is small little puddles form in tracks of other large animals that come down to the water in the muddy patches. Just look at the tails going vigorously, the ears going vigorously, lots of little birds flying around. What a great time to view watering holes, the middle of the day. This is a time when most of the antelopes and so-called prey species know that predators will likely be laying it down in the shade somewhere and will not be too bothered in expending energy to try and catch them if they come down and have a drink. But quite an impressive gazelle. Another thing interesting about Grant is Grant, that is of course James Grant, joined Hanning's Peak in a very memorable expedition which solved the problem of the Nile sources. Interesting that was regarded as a problem of understanding where the sources of the Nile is. But Speke, also a well-known naturalist, also has quite a bit of species named after him. In South Africa, one of the more notable, the Speke's hinge tortoise. And Speke was also one of the first Europeans to reach Lake Victoria, if I'm not mistaken. And I can hear quite a bit of alarming in the background. Oh, that's a nice view of the larger watering hole, but it sounds like grey go-away birds alarming at something. Interesting terrain here. It's quite dry already. Yo, just look at all these little birds. That is incredible to see. Now last time I said my guess would be that most of them would be red-billed quillias. I did see a number of weavers in between. Like always, seed-eating birds like to gather near the water's edge in the middle of the day when it's hot. But what a perfectly situated tree. I can see in the background, if you look at the large thorn trees in the background, you can see lots of bird nests on them. So quite a lot of weaver birds in this area. Just look at that, that is incredible. It's impossible to count how many little birds there are. even more impossible to tell how many different species there are. And they just come and they go. Amazing that they can line up a whole branch like that full of thorns without one of them getting jabbed. We got a very interesting question about Brenda. Brenda's asking if any of the animals' names, named after explorers that is, will change due to negative connotations with the old Victorian era and colonial explorers. Brenda, that is a very good question. To be honest, I know some of them have already changed. There are talks of changing certain ones. I find often the ones associated with bird names, certainly, well, there's a few that comes to mind that might have quite negative connotations to them. And I think it's also quite a fascinating piece of history in a way. One doesn't always make too much consideration of the names included in birds and animals' names, but I think one should. At the same time, like, regardless of the negative connotations, it is quite an interesting part of history that almost shouldn't be forgotten in a way. But having said that, I do think that there were a lot of very bad things done in the name of science back in the day, and a lot of these people just tended to be interested in birds as well and other creatures. But I think from here it looks like these gazelle are starting to move off from the water's edge, so let's head over to Aldonio and see if we have the elephants back at the water. Aha! Not the elephants for now, but two giraffes wasting their time that they could be having a drink. Look at this very careful pacing, almost rhythmic moving. These two guys are sizing each other up. Now it's difficult to say there because it seems to be a dip there at the back, down towards the trees from the watering hole. But indeed the one giraffe looks slightly taller than the other one. And judging from their general size, I'd say these are probably two younger males just sparring with each other, practicing what would become an essential skill to master, especially when older, competing for access to female herds and for mating. You could almost see the dust came off the giraffe that got grazed there, but that is very interesting. Now it's a careful pacing that happens between these animals to not be too far and not be too close at the same time, but then again they also need to move in closer to actually get to knock each other. And the aim is of course to go for the groin area or the back legs, and those long necks with their very heavy heads give them quite a bit of momentum. But essentially this is the way male giraffes battle it out. The younger they are, the less honed their skills are. So they do a lot of practice like this, especially in all male groups. You'll notice there's always at least one or two trying to do this. Although these guys look like there's a little bit more serious intent, and they might already be at the age where it is of more significance to them. But interesting how they can quite easily disappear like that behind the bush. Ooh, just look at that. Butterflies. You can see they're sitting right in the area where the elephants have spilled some water. Now, to be honest, it would be difficult for me to accurately identify these butterflies from here, but there do seem to be a few larger butterflies. Looks like blue, white, as well as yellow butterflies, broad bordered yellows. Some vagrants. They come down to gain a bit of moisture. Aha. It sounds like there is an elephant approaching. But just look at all the beautiful colors. Now these little critters, it's amazing to see. Nothing goes to waste actually. Well, we've spent a good amount of time in East Africa this afternoon, so I think it's about time we head over to South Africa. We're going to head over to Taal and see what's happening there. Elephants, a crocodile and a zebra in a very sunny Taal. This looks pretty spectacular. Amazing having these big bulls come down to have their drink. Crocodile out basking in the very full watering hole here at Taal. Normally there's a nice deep little gully that runs down to the water's edge, round about where that crocodile is laying, but I'm pretty sure these elephants are going to come round to that edge and have a drink. It's still quite green even though the season has changed. We can see the trees up on the hill at the back still carry their greener leaves. And I'm sure these elephants had a good feeding session in the shady bits of those trees. And now it's time for a drink. Now, I had a question from Colin, and it was regarding the giraffes and their necking. And Colin's saying it seems very painful. And then he asked if they use it against predators or other threats. Now, Colin, I don't actually recall of any incident where giraffe directly attacked predators that way. But having said that, I also don't think it's impossible. I do know that there has been instances of giraffe attacking people that way. But normally their long legs and a kick to the back is sufficient for predators, especially lion, which is the only viable threat really for a full-grown giraffe. But it's interesting, as this elephant is making his way down, you can see their trunk tips going back and forth, just smelling the water. I'm wondering, likely picking up from the lodge in the area. Maybe it's the scent of people around, or maybe it's taking everything in. Other animals that might have been in the area. Have a look, you can see on their backs and the top of their head they've got the beautiful red soil. There's another elephant coming down, and looks like it might get busy. Brenda is asking why I think elephants have such strong individual personalities, and how does that affect their survival in changing environments. Well, Brenda, personality wise, I guess individual circumstances, herds, genetics, all of it plays a role. I mean, it's a large animal. We know that they're very intelligent, therefore I guess it's easier to determine that they've got strong individual personalities, and it's probably easier for us as humans to relate. But exactly why, I wouldn't know. I mean, I think having to deal with so many other large creatures, they probably need to be they probably need to have quite strong personalities in order to survive and to get anywhere. I know today elephants' numbers are a fraction of what it used to be, but before Europeans brought the gunpowder and the gun into Africa, their numbers were like astounding all over the continent, and they roamed in very large herds, large groups all over. So I do think from that also stems the fact that they had to have quite strong personalities in order to survive. I guess also one of the other things with elephants is circumstances shape their personalities, kind of like it does with us. So elephants growing up in certain areas, whatever shape their personalities and the circumstances that they have to experience as young animals growing up, probably will determine how they deal with environmental changes, what they've learned, what they know, the way they learn things. I know that even though there are quite a bit of issues with elephants living in close proximity to humans in some areas, I do think that conflict that arises from it also teaches certain elephants certain skills and insights into human behavior and how to navigate a changing landscape. And I think that certainly can aid in survival. I know after the war in southern Angola, there was a period where much of that area was completely devoid of the large elephants, and after a while there were reports of elephant bulls making their way back into the area. And I guess for elephants to navigate landscapes like that were affected heavily by wars, they probably had to have some sort of a personal trait that developed from living in surrounding areas. Maybe their interaction and knowledge of humans prompted them to gain the confidence to explore those areas, or to push them away from other areas. But then again also their eagerness to learn from each other. Now these three guys seem to probably have spent quite a bit of time with each other. I'm sure their understanding of each other's personal spaces is quite well determined. Aha! Maybe they're also standing like this to take in a little bit of sun, knowing they're near the water now, waiting, sniffing the air, seeing if there might be any other elephants, herds nearby that might be coming down to have a drink. There's a wildebeest just casually feeding in the background. I have to say, this area around Tao's watering hole gets quite busy, especially in the dry season, and it holds substantial water, it seems, throughout. And as you can see, with the change in color from green to that dull yellow color of the grass, that means that animals will start to gather probably more regularly in the coming months during this time of the day. Good spots for a male wildebeest to keep throughout the season. So Jaden's asking, which species in Africa do I believe has the most complex social structure and why? Elephants, lions, hyenas or baboons? Jaden, that's a good question. I think between elephants and baboons, I would probably put it there. I think both of them are quite complex. I think it also depends on the size and the area, the size of the group of animals, as well as the area that they find themselves in, meaning how they relate to other groups and its sizes in areas. I think the great apes has got the most complex social structures. If I had to take a guess, gorillas, chimpanzees, bonobos. Those would be my first choice for complex social structures. I read the other day that researchers are believing that some of the groups of chimpanzees in certain areas are going through a civil war, which is quite an interesting and drastic realization. And that was due to group sizes. A very large group that kind of experienced a split between loyalties of dominant animals. So that is quite an interesting thing. I think circumstances also shape group dynamics and social structures. So yeah, I don't think there's anyone that's really that simple, to be honest. And I think depending on a lot of external factors as well as sizes of groups, there's a lot of complexity inherent in any social structure. But I'd say elephants and baboons, out of the 4 groups that you've mentioned, is probably the most complex, although hyenas can be very tricky as well. Once again, also depending on the area. In areas with very large hyena clans, social structures are extremely complex, between dominant females, subordinate females, their offspring. So it's truly difficult to say. I think in their own right, each of these animals have very complex social structures. I generally think that the more intelligent animals are the ones with the more complex structures. So I'd say maybe elephants, hyenas and baboons more complex than lions. But yeah, it's difficult to say for sure. So while these elephants keep enjoying their drink, hopefully they'll stick around, but I think let's head over to Fig Tree Crossing in the Mara to see what's happening there. Oh wow, we got a young hippo that's fallen over, and one that looks very concerned, and others that don't look too concerned. But now we've got 2 young hippos that's fallen over. You know, it is quite, in general, it feels like the animals have quite a relaxed afternoon out in the sun. It seems like it's been sunny all around, and what a way to spend the afternoon. Nice pod of hippos. Looks like a few larger animals off to the right here. It's halfway in the water. You can see they bear the scars at the back of lives lived in the river. Well, there's also quite a few young ones. There we go. Now, baby hippo is a very interesting little animal, and certainly a peculiar looking but quite a cute little animal. Now I'm wondering what those ones are doing standing up. It doesn't look like there's much to eat there on that bank. Talking about social structures, hippos, depending on the stretch of river and proximity to other pods of hippos in that area, they can also have quite a complex social dynamic amongst them. Like we're seeing here with these 2. Seems like maybe they were a bit too close for comfort there to each other. It's always interesting to notice that the young ones are usually a little bit further away from where the more complex dynamics within the group is unfolding. There we go. That big hippo over to the left is just getting comfortable there. Nice little spot up on the slight incline of the bank. Now I'm loving seeing the little hippos open their mouths like that. Probably do that from behavior that they've witnessed in the adults. Already trying to show off their position within the social structure. Hippos often open their mouths as a way to advertise their tools or their weapons, so to speak, and also to communicate with each other. And this little guy is gradually getting pushed back into the water, so maybe he's not too keen on that. Interesting, I see there is quite a bit of scars even on the young hippos' bodies. And one thing to note is that little hippos do tend to sometimes suffer as a consequence of aggressiveness shown between other larger animals within a pod, and it's often taken out on any nearby animal, and they do tend to occasionally suffer the consequences. But yeah, these guys are certainly looking like they have a well-deserved nap, some of them, after being active probably most throughout the night, moving around, feeding. You can see there's no grass growing on these banks, so I'm sure these animals travel quite a distance to feed. And in that case, even though all the little ones are spending time together now, they'll split up into their own individual groups of mother and calf. But we got a question from Brenda asking, what do I believe is the biggest misconception that people have about African wildlife, and how that misconception affects wild conservation? Brenda, that's a good question. I think there's a lot of damaging misconceptions, unfortunately. I think one of the biggest ones, though, might be that money donated to conservation programs go for conservation programs. I think that might be quite a big one. Unfortunately, I think that's not always the case. But I'll leave that at that. I think in terms of direct misconceptions regarding animals that affect them, I think a classical example would be a misconception about hyenas and some other predators like wild dog. I think unfortunately the lionkin had a huge influence on that initially, affecting the ideas that people from outside Africa might have formed about the spotted hyena as a cowardly, stupid animal that just scavenges and mindlessly killing other creatures. I think that affected the hyena's reputation for a very, very long time. And I think that also negatively affected it in the sense that they were regarded as vermin in a lot of areas. Same with wild dogs. In some parts of, in South Africa, I know back in the day the wild dog was considered a terrible species that just hunted antelopes. And no regard for its social structure or complex relationship to ecosystems actually put them directly in harm's way. They were eliminated. Predators in general, actually, in some national parks, they were just eliminated around the turn of the 1900s. They were regarded as damage-causing animals and with no benefit, until later it was realized that there might be some value in them to people that would like to see them. So I think it's difficult to say which misconception. I think there are various, and I think as time goes along, with new information getting revealed, we're also learning more and more about how things fit into the natural environment and their role within it. And hopefully we progress past some of these misconceptions. But yeah, it's very difficult to say which is the biggest misconception. Yeah. But then we've got a question from Lewis asking which animal shows the most surprising intelligence or adaptability in the face of human pressure. Also a tricky question to answer. I do like these questions, both Brenda's question and Lewis's question. They're very interesting. It's good food for thought. But Lewis's question, I think one of the animals, I guess hyena comes to mind, elephant comes to mind. Lewis, I think those animals are very adaptable. Certainly baboons. I think baboons are arguably one of the most adaptable. I remember a few years ago I watched it was a helicopter chase of a baboon on the roofs of houses in Cape Town. And it was like watching a fugitive on live TV getting chased down after it's done something. And I remember thinking to myself, like, it's a terrible way to to view baboons, and yes, indeed they can cause a lot of damage, but in a way over the years people have also kind of accepted in a way that they are there to stay and they're going to stay there. So I think I think they're definitely one of the ones that comes to mind. And hyena as well. Certain parts of Africa like Ethiopia, Nigeria, I know they've also learned to adapt to regions that's occupied and that's quite urbanized. I think any animal pushed into a corner or a situation where they have some level of intelligence will adapt quite surprisingly in ways that we don't think about. Another one that I think we can't ever forget about is the crocodile. Surprisingly, we don't regard reptiles always as the most intelligent of animals, but the crocodile's been around for a very, very, very long time, and I think the crocodile has that little hippo on the left just got and the one there at the back. I think their little skins are still quite sensitive to the sharp claws of the oxpeckers. So every now and again they get a little jolt when the oxpecker lands on them, picks off a tick. That's quite funny to watch. Now, watching these hippos, they look like they don't really actually... They're not in comfortable positions, to be honest. They look to me like they're about to roll off the bank any moment, except for these in the water. So those guys out on the bank desperately trying to get some sunlight do seem like they've got a bit of an odd position there. But of course this is also the best time of the day for the oxpecker to take off whatever parasites climbed on there during the night. Well, I think these hippos are just enjoying their nice hot little afternoon here on the banks of the Mara River, so let's head over to Moella to see what's happening there. Whoa. Now that's quite a sight. Looks like there's a nice large cloud moving over Moella. You can see some sunlight there at the back, but it does seem quite warm. And that is indeed a sizable herd of zebra. Nice to see, especially in a watering hole, or at a watering hole in Botswana. Zebras, of course, being the national animal, and zebra surprisingly used to be a still is, but used to be a very numerous animal, especially in the northern parts of Botswana, and also had one of the larger migrations in Africa back in the day. But this is spectacular. Oh, there's a lot of animals here, a lot of zebra. That's a very big group, well, combination of groups of zebras coming down. You can see where those zebras are going up the banks there. I can see it looks like that those banks are used regularly by large groups of animals coming down like this. And it's just zebras wherever you look. That's incredible.
When nature calls, Maui is the only answer. Satisfy your wanderlust and take to the open road in one of our fully equipped motorhomes. Boasting a fridge, gas stovetop, AC and bathroom, our motorhomes are comfortable and spacious, making any self-drive adventure in the Kruger or garden route memorable. Whether you travel alone, as a couple or the whole family, Maui has a motorhome for you. Maui, home where you roam.
Some rivalries don't need explaining. They're felt. They're etched into history. The All Blacks, the Springboks, head to head in South Africa. Join us for 2 unforgettable tests, from the fiercest rivalry in sport to luxury safari, hosted by a Springbok legend. Rugby and Safari by Wild Earth Travel. The greatest rivalry, experienced the only way it should be.
Welcome to your daily catch-up, your 30-minute look back at the past 24 hours out on safari.
Have some coffee, get some snacks, and then just wait for the animals to come down.
It's raining cats.
Pancakes are great when it starts to drizzle outside.
What are they feeding him?
When adventure calls, answer with Brits. Take on Southern Africa's most breathtaking landscapes from behind the wheel of a fully equipped 4x4 or SUV. From tents and bedding to a fridge and full kitchen gear, everything you need is already on board. And with 24-hour roadside assistance, you're free to go further and explore with confidence. Open roads, total freedom, no limits, just the journey ahead. Brits, take on Southern Africa's most breathtaking landscapes from behind the wheel of a fully equipped 4x4 or SUV. From tents and bedding to a fridge and full kitchen gear, everything you need is already on board. And with 24-hour roadside assistance, you're free to go further and explore with confidence. Open roads, total freedom, no limits, just the journey ahead. Brits. equipped for adventure.
No. Group this large, I don't believe that they can stay in this region throughout the season. I'm sure they would come spend a while in the area and then move on to a different area before maybe coming back. Grace is asking if zebras have to visit watering points every day. Grace, indeed they do, if it's available. They will. The zebra tend to stay not too far from water, usually within 15 kilometers where it's available regularly. Generally speaking, also zebras in areas where they can, where it's necessary, they will make local seasonal migrations from one area to an area with more abundant water sources and food sources. In that case, they'll gather in large groups like this. But they also have home ranges in areas where water is regularly available, and in that case they will come down at least once a day to come and have a drink. If it's within proximity, they would probably come down twice a day. But it does depend on the area and the availability of surface water. But that's incredible. I have not actually noticed any other animal species here than zebra. You can see a yellow-billed stork getting lucky here in the foreground. I can imagine that in these muddy pools there must be quite a bit of stranded fish or frogs or whatever it can grab. And the vultures coming in. It seems like there's a couple of ducks flying off. Now, I'm wondering why the vultures might be coming in. It's always like it could just be coming down for a wash. But it might also just be that, maybe they have their nests in the tall trees nearby. But from this magnificent sight of zebras, I think we're gonna head back to... Oh, there we go, there's a kudu coming down. One different animal. But as this kudu is coming down, let's head back over to Otonyo. Where we have elephants again. Amazing. And this time we have different elephants. Elephants and butterflies. I always like to watch elephants just standing like that, taking in their surroundings. There's a lot happening while an elephant's just standing like that. Even though to us it might just seem like it's resting, which it might be. They're always paying attention, sniffing the air, listening out. They can communicate over large distances. They can pick up on the communications between members of different herds over large distances. So they do just sometimes stand and take in their surroundings a bit to see what's happening. And then of course also to watch developing interactions like this around the water. And that was an elephant letting one rip there. What an interesting sound. Well, how thoughtful of him to do that before he approached the larger elephant. It's quite interesting, that elephant there in the middle with the one tusk looks like the oldest out of these three. And maybe the interest from the other two. But I do enjoy how elephants often like to, they just like to follow suit. They like to see if one elephant is interested in something, others might move around to investigate from their side. So Gavin is saying that these sounds remind him of Jurassic Park. Now, interesting fact, Gavin, is that Jurassic Park sounds that they used for the Tyrannosaurus was in fact elephant noises that was recorded, and it was recorded, played, re-recorded, played and re-recorded on old tapes, and then they used those sounds in the movie to create the sounds for what was the T-Rex. Interestingly enough, they also used recordings of whale sounds, which was same thing, recorded then played and re-recorded for the sounds of the large herbivore dinosaurs. So, not completely far off. No wonder it reminds you of Jurassic Park. I think also with elephants, their sheer size and magnificence is a little bit no, it definitely does make one think of Jurassic Park. Let's have a look now. Looks like that large elephant is completely accepting of the younger one, standing so close by. And I can't help but wonder what they're actually doing. Maybe the younger one's trying to move in to greet. There we go. Yeah. Trunk in the mouth. A good way to inspect another elephant, a sign of trust. Like a handshake. Stacy is asking if I could speak to an elephant matriarch for 5 minutes. What would I ask her? Stacy, first of all, I don't think 5 minutes would be long enough. I think it would be difficult for me not to sound like a blabbering fool in 5 minutes. There'd be so much questions I would want to ask an elephant matriarch. I don't know. I don't know what to ask. I'd have to think about that one. But that's a good question. There's one cultural belief in South Africa, and I'm sure in other areas of Africa as well, that while the husband's wife is pregnant, the husband is able to understand elephants. Not talk to them, but understand them. Which is quite an interesting belief, I find. And then Desiree is asking if I could bring back one extinct African species. Which would it be, and what impact would it have on the ecosystem? Yo, Desiree, I do not know. I think you'd have to look at it maybe in a few different eras. I think more recent, I'd probably bring back the lion in northern Africa. That would certainly be a big one for me. I think the Barbary lion, the lions that used to live in those more arid areas of North Africa, that would certainly be something that would probably be a big one for me. But however, it would be difficult. Like, obviously a predator plays a very important role within any ecosystem, but I think it would be difficult to know for sure what impact it would have nowadays, thinking of the fact that there's probably not a lot of prey left for it in certain regions. But yeah, there was a time that the lion roamed all the way from the tip of Africa through into the Middle East. So the North African lion, maybe the Cape lion, that would be quite spectacular species which I wouldn't mind having back. If we go further back than that, I'd probably say the Spinosaurus. That was the original subspecies found. It was in Africa, if I'm not mistaken. Also a large species of crocodile known as the Sarcosuchus. Any of those would do. I wouldn't mind seeing that. What else came from Africa? Giganotosaurus. Some of the African dinosaur species. Another interesting one would be the African bear. I think that would be very, very interesting. But then again, I think things also happen the way they should. I think the more modern species maybe that suffered due to the trade, animal trade, maybe from the start of the Roman Empire up until now. But have a look. It's quite a interesting, friendly interaction here between these elephants. Usually a sign of them being relaxed. and comfortable. I see the one elephant there at the back with the large tusks has got a little bit of a kink in its trunk. Now, unfortunately, if I would have to, well, it looks like it's damaged. It looks like it had a cut in it, so unfortunately it might be from a snare. But I heard we have an interesting sighting at Camelthorn, so I think let's quickly head over there. We might come back to Old Donio a little later. Oh wow, indeed we do. An elephant crossing. And 2 zebras, watching them carefully from the safety of the bank. This is quite spectacular. Elephants moving through water is always fascinating to see. Looks like a number of large bulls here. Younger ones at the back. Bigger ones kind of leading the way. Also, once again, interesting. I can't help but note the already receding grass levels. Interesting how this area, Southern Africa, gets affected by the changing seasons. Of course, something that affects elephant movements greatly. And also Botswana is the country in Africa with the highest number of elephants. A massive amount of elephants that move through these areas. Here we go, you can see the younger boys in the water having a bit of a playful moment there. Now, like I said, I believe this might be a group of bulls, this, and these younger ones would very likely be gaining a lot of experience and knowledge from these older guys, and they do have this little bit of playfulness still in them, but they also know that they can't be too blasé about what's happening. Now, interesting. I've just been given the numbers, the estimated numbers for populations of elephants throughout certain countries in Africa. Now, this is quite an interesting one. Botswana ranking first with 131,000. Zimbabwe with 65,000 to 100,000. Gabon around about 95,000, mostly forest elephants. And Tanzania 60 to 81,000 elephants. And Kenya about 36,000. Now, I do know this is quite an interesting thing, elephant population numbers, because it's very difficult to estimate them, especially with forest elephants, which is relatively understudied compared to the savanna elephant. However, I do know that these numbers also shift greatly, especially between Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and South Africa and Namibia. Elephant numbers tend to shift around quite a bit. and I do know that the northern Botswana at certain times of the year can actually carry a massive amount of elephants, way more than 200,000 that move through the region. So it is very interesting to see these estimated populations. I think also elephant populations, to get exact counts on them is quite difficult in areas that elephants are well protected, and where they have sufficient resources. Their population growth is also quite large. It can be more than 5% in some cases annually, which is a massive amount. Can you imagine 5% of 131,000? And if you think about it, in countries like Botswana, Tanzania, Mozambique, and some areas where elephants move through regions where they quite actively live in areas that's inhabited by quite a lot of people as well. Not always large urban settlements, but smaller settlements, lots of farming communities. So you can imagine there is quite a bit of issues that arise from large elephant numbers and close proximity to humans. And it's a tricky one. Elephants, they are regarded as, well, they were for a long time endangered, and their numbers are low in certain parts where they were found throughout the continent formerly. But the regions that do have the large amounts of elephants nowadays makes it tricky because their numbers are high, especially here in Botswana, and that does create a bit of problems due to spatial issues. So with elephants, if you think elephant, you always got to think space and land. Arguably one of the more political animals in Africa, and certainly an animal that that currently gives conservationists a lot of head scratchings. Well, this was a spectacular sight, seeing the elephants cross, but I heard we've also got something odd at Victoria Falls. Oh, indeed we do. Oh no. It looks like a buffalo calf's just been taken by a crocodile. Oh no. Have a look at that mother. That's quite interesting. Shame. She must be quite nervous, even though it doesn't quite seem that way. You can see there's the calf is clearly, there's a little bit of life left in it, but by the looks of it, it looks like the crocodile's got it. And it looks like that thought sank in by the mother, unfortunately. And this is quite a... There we go, there's the croc's head. Looks like it's got the calf's head in its mouth. Yeah, unfortunately, oh, the marabous are already waiting. Unfortunately for this mother, there's not much that can be done, and I think she has already made that realization. That is a tricky thing to see and often very difficult for us to understand. That little calf, which was most of her life at this stage, is now become part of the food chain, and there's not much she can do. She looks in rather good nick still. But let's see, with a buffalo you should never completely take the surrounding members out of the equation. So there might also be, it looks like the calf's settled now. It looks like the croc's done its deed. So it would be interesting to see how this mother reacts now. I think there is also, of course, a bit of fear of just stepping into the water and trying to attempt something. There we go. There's a bellow. Now for us, sometimes for some people this might be a bit hard to watch, knowing that that mother would... It's just...
When nature calls, Maui is the only answer. Satisfy your wanderlust and take to the open road in one of our fully equipped motorhomes. Boasting a fridge, gas stovetop, AC and bathroom, our motorhomes are comfortable and spacious, making any self-drive adventure in the Kruger or garden route memorable. Whether you travel alone, as a couple or the whole family, Maui has a motorhome for you. Maui, home where you roam.
The Masai Mara in February 2027 with your favorite Wild Earth guides. This is an extraordinary safari opportunity. You'll stay at the exclusive Kobe Mara, a private villa in the action-packed Northern Mara. Your hosts for this fun-filled safari are David Gigi Gitu, Cedric Dold, and me, James Henry.
Would you like to know what an elephant's favorite food is? You could ask me questions like that in real time. Our safaris are live and interactive from the heart of Africa. Over here. Watch Safari Live and connect with nature.
When adventure calls, answer with Brits. Take on Southern Africa's most breathtaking landscapes from behind the wheel of a fully equipped 4x4 or SUV. From tents and bedding to a fridge and full kitchen gear, everything you need is already on board. And with 24-hour roadside assistance, you're free to go further and explore with confidence. Open roads, total freedom, no limits, just the journey ahead. Brits, equipped for adventure.
And have a look. She can't really see where the croc and the young one is. She can just stand and hang around the area. You can see she's looking back and forth up along the hill, it's probably knowing that the herds also moved off, which makes the situation even more tricky. They're sniffing around the edges of the wood. But Shem, I think to maybe end on a happier note, let's leave this poor buffalo and the croc with its meal and head over to Moela, and we see what's happening there. Well, from a mourning buffalo to a large group of zebra that seems to be in their element. Now earlier on, just as we left Moela, we saw some elephant coming down. And it looks like a lot of the zebra has now moved off. And it goes to show animals tend to flock to water at the same time. There we go. There is the elephant. You can just see its ears moving right at the top of the screen on the right hand side. There we go. There's another elephant. But judging from their shiny bodies, they've already been down to the water. And these guys might be moving off, but often what the elephants might do is they might come down to the water in a haste, and then after they've cooled down and had their drink, they will kind of slowly move away, feeding, checking the area out. You can see there's a third one as well. There's some impala coming down as well. I'm surprised at the large amount of animals that come down to the spot to drink here at Moela Safari Lodge. I've seen quite a few elephants around here in the past as well. The bulls, sometimes the bigger bulls might come a little bit later during the day, in the middle of the day, and they might hang around a little bit while the herds will come, have their drink and go. You can hear the zebras are very, very active. What a scene. With what seems like a vulture flying overhead, using that warm rising thermals to gain some lift. But what a interesting afternoon. What a spectacular afternoon we've had around the watering holes. It's been absolutely great. We've seen lots of elephant action. We've lost a buffalo calf, Victoria Falls. We've had some playing giraffes and a very large group of zebra. It's been an absolute spectacular afternoon, and I want to thank all our viewers for joining us this afternoon, and I hope that you join us again tomorrow. From all of us here at Wild Earth, have a good afternoon.